Once again, it is my privilege and pleasure to come and spend these few moments of your time. At this time in the history as it unfolds, as we have spoken about a shift in awareness and consciousness is underway. And as a result, a new approach to how humanity views the unfolding universe as experienced. And it is becoming more clear, shall we say, that everything is an energetic expression. That is, in the old paradigm, it used to be called vibration. Yet in one sense, shall we say, it is magnetic fields of interaction. So the physical world arises by the interaction of different fields of expression. So shall we begin? Because at the beginning it is always more, shall we call it technical, more complex, or seemingly complex. When one arrives in the physical world as a young baby, as a child, the first level of experience is to find a stability. One is always looking for safety and security. One is building, shall we say, the blocks of interaction. First of all, it is the safety, the security, and the physical application. Then one is always looking for ownership of one's environment. One, first of all, wants to own the parents and own then one's location and own one's things that one interacts with, the toys and so on. One is accumulating. Does that make some sort of sense? One has no certainty of, first of all, relationships. Then over time one builds a sense of other. One's security is assured and one begins to interact with opposites. You understand then where you are imposing a different energetic layer. One is increasing the vibrational content or lifting one's magnetic field level of waveform. The frequency is increasing. And this begins to manifest, first of all, as interacting with those around you in a parallel universe, and eventually one builds friendships and relationships. One begins to build one's universe of the sort of friends and attitudes that one is manifesting and broadcasting out into the universe. Eventually, of course, this will build attractions to others and events. One's attitudes, beliefs, and certainties begin to broadcast and to magnetize. So you are beginning to build your own world. separate from that was originally provided for you. And eventually then, of course, one begins to realize one has qualities of leadership or qualities of following. One has a certain degree of influence in one's world. One learns how to manipulate the vibrational tonality of one's environment. One begins to take on a personality and an identity that is broadcasting itself as a self into the world. And as those three, shall we call them, the lower frequency bandwidths begin to interpenetrate one another, you have built yourself a way into the world. The world is one's oyster as such. So then we often, it is related our code, such energy systems often notated as what is called the chakras. But in essence, they are magnetic fields of existence. And understanding both how they come about and the interaction of each one determines one's experience in the physical world. That is enough to begin the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mercredan, for being with us again today. Thank you for your opening statement. Obviously, it's very much online with what we'd like to talk to you about today, being chakras and getting that higher perspective on what chakras really are. I wondered if we could start today around the three physical chakras, the root chakra, the sacral, and the solar plexus. And if we could go through each one and get an understanding about what we think is what's in balance and out of balance, and how we know if a chakra is in balance or out of balance, and what we can do about balancing our chakras.
Then let us begin, because having laid out the first three, one has to recognize that the chakra itself, a single chakra, is not ever out of balance. It is simply a broadcast frequency. But and the way in which they interact, there is a harmony developed between such bottom of, shall we say, the functional chakra elements as we have described them. So, shall we say, the first chakra is how one deals with one's resources. That is how one deals with the physical manifest world in terms of security and attitude and finance. So one is in a secure place, shall we say, if one is not in a way unprotected by lack, that is lack of opportunity, lack of food, lack of water, lack of money, lack of security, and so on. If that were the case, then one's entire energy system is brought to bear, and one begins to take whatever actions are required in order to provide such security. In many cases, then, what you would call revolutionary activity arises from that lack of security, that lacking of certainty in one's physical ability to survive. And in certain cases, shall we say, it interacts first of all with the second level of field, if you like, the second chakra, which is, shall we call it, terminated as the creative center, that which offers creative opportunities, creative abilities, and therefore what could call it the sexual energy point. That is the interaction between self and other. And in certain cases, shall we say, where the lower security is compromised, then often the second center will also be compromised. Then one often sees that rather than interacting, one takes the form of, shall we say, asserting. Assertion in this case might turn into the actions of the bully, or of the attacker, of the rapist, and all of such negative expressions. Do you follow what I mean? So often humanity wants to blame such actions as if they are separate from the lower pattern of security, because most, if all, have in some sense been left to their own devices or suffered major abuses and so forth. Does this make some sort of sense? Yeah. If, however, one succeeds, shall we say, in such activity, if one becomes, shall we call them, a warlord, then one begins to assert the third level of power. One begins to assert and broadcast oneself as a powerful and indestructible force. And so, shall we say, then all three are out of balance with one another. Often, shall we say, that is the most distinct case. But often, most humans interact all the while using not just power, but position and, shall we call it, manipulation in order to achieve their goals of being overlord to someone else. So you see, often as you arise in the levels of power often comes because one has large amounts of finance, money at the bottom, then one asserts one's power over others in a sexual form. Does this make sense? So you see it all around the world. Powerful people manipulating and enticing others into actions and activities that are less useful for the evolution of that specific person. Does this make some sort of sense?
Yeah, it does.
So the balancing act is within. Is one, shall we say, secure in oneself? Is one, shall we say, active in their relationships, not using their sexuality to control another? Because if that is occurring, then there is an imbalance of power. Relationships operate within balance. The purpose of a relationship is to learn balance, to learn to give and to take responsibility and to allow responsibility. So then, shall we say, the sexual action is one of balance. One then engages in forms. Does this make sense? Because, as we have pointed out, the second law is the law of polarity, that there are two sides to every coin. And one side is not more important than the other, does not require more respect than the other. But one side of the coin will always, shall we say, be the container that is looks on the outside as if it is supportive, but in the longer term is the, shall we say, the launching point for the other side. One side seems to be determinant, but it is within the safety and security of the container that it is capable of moving out and moving into the world that is provisory. Does this follow how one begins to understand the choice of manifesting or coming into the world, incarnating as boy or as girl? Because each one has a certain position, not so much a role as a position that is to learn how to work in harmony, to gather the creative issues, shall we say, to provide, shall we call it, the harmonizing forces that bring about the union of power. Nothing in the spiritual world can, shall we say, proceed except from that point. Does this follow?
Yeah, thank you. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the third chakra and what that means to us?
Shall we call this the assertive or the power distribution? Shall we say, because first of all, it is the second chakra that binds, that magnetizes, that creates union. So, shall we call it the law of magnetism, operates at that level, but it is empowered by the energy of the third element, the third vibration, the third frequency that is interdispersing with the physical world. So the third power operates to, shall we say, shake the physical world into shape. And it begins to materialize that which has been created in the second layer. Does this follow? So one begins to have assertion. If one, shall we say, asserts only in a feminine way, it will be out of balance. If one asserts only in a masculine way, it will be out of balance. But together, if one is asserting as a union, then it is powerful beyond recognition. And that is why often in the history of your ritual work, creation occurred during the sexual act, during the point where one was in union. Then one in true union is not trying to control the other or to take from the other, but to unite with the other as the beginning of the understanding that all things are united. So it is in the beginning, shall we say, in the early stages of life, one is productive in terms of producing children. The union, the child is the product of the union. But as one ages beyond that state, the union is far more powerful and uniting in terms of, shall we say, holding each other and growing into a spiritual, shall we say, a higher vibration. Let us take it away from the word spiritual because it has such religious tendencies towards it. But shall we say, two people who have continued in union will age far more acceptably, will be far more harmonious and quiet and so on. Their abilities are refined. Does this follow?
Yeah, thank you.
I want to also say it is also, shall we say, at the heart of humans' problems when the, shall we call it the union of two opposites is incomplete. And often such unions occur, but the person, each person is not, shall we say, throwing their whole being into it. They're holding a separation, holding something back, holding their energies back. And as a result, the relationship teeters and totters. When one is willing to fully engage, then the energy of one becomes multiplied, not by another one, but multifold. One starts to see the results emanating into the world in such a way that the union of power is able to manifest them into physicality.
So what happens then if you're single, or if you feel spending a large majority of your life in not a unionship?
You understand then, of course, the challenge in talking about this is that one is called some as not being open to the opportunity of such things. However, I want to say this, is that for some people, it is not a life designed for creativity in such a fashion. The lifetime often is presented because of previous versions of self, where one has lost self to another or one has dominated another in other lifetimes. And so being cast, shall we say, in one side or another, one often is focused on other opportunities. Let us say, if someone is not in, shall we call it, a firm relationship because of their career, then one is putting one's attention on finance and one's, shall we say, one's power. So the middle chakra is left unfulfilled. The result will be much more difficult if one is not, shall we say, maintaining that relationship. There have been multiple difficulties across time when this has occurred. As an example is your Catholic Church, where it was dictated that the priest or the monk should be celibate. And then the resulting power struggles that occur with self, and thus often manifesting abusively, arises from that distortion. Does that make some sort of sense?
Yeah, it does.
So there are distortions, and shall we call them difficulties of finding one's way, shall we call it, into the higher three chakras, because when you arrive at the middle chakra, the middle one of heart, one has to have balanced the lower chakras, balanced the higher chakras, balanced the chakras of the higher and the lower before one can open up the heart. Now, we often hear people talking about having open heart, but relating this to emotionality. But it is not the same thing.
So can we go back to talking about the unionship? Are we as human beings born to find unionship? Is that part of our purpose of existence?
Shall we say this? That in the beginning, all things are one. Once we have taken that into account, that all things are in fact a union, the uniting of all aspects, then everything else is a separation. And one is separated all the way down to one's birth. One is born separate. One is born of parents, but one is first of all working to separate away from them, from their domination, from their concepts and ideas, from their control, to find one's own control, and then to learn self-control, and then to find union. And it is the first step of integration into, once again, the uniting whole. First of all, you find someone, and you find them, and you, shall we say, fall in love. And then you start to get closer, and you discover that the person you fell in love with is a complete failure, nothing like they should have been. And you learn to stop criticizing and judging another, and you start to see they are just like yourself. They are trying to improve, and the best you can do for them is to help them, is to love them through their own self-criticism, to unite with them and to find compassion for another. And it is in that union that then you produce the children, who also are not perfect. And you learn to love the imperfect, to support them in their own growing. So your union has achieved a greater union. You start to see not only your children, but your friends and your friends' children and all of this, and you try more and more to accept them as they are. Do you follow what I am saying? And then you begin to watch your community and your society and your country and and on it goes. You start to try to be more open and accepting, recognizing that while you are not perfect, one should not throw stones. You understand? Do not live in a glass house and throw stones. the understanding of why that is. And as you become more and more accepting, you begin to allow others into the world. Then your boundaries and your separateness begin to become more flexible, more fluid, and eventually you are arriving at that place of non-judgment.
Mm-hmm. So what about what you just described as a fairly traditional model of finding your partner and then having children, in a sense? For those that choose not to have children or choose not to find their partner at that stage of their life, are they still going on a journey of learning that everybody's not perfect and to then accept in the process?
Of course. You have to remember that there are many who are incapable for other reasons. There is not a one description serves all.
Yeah.
There are many different systems and values that are coming into being at this particular moment in the evolution of humanity. As I have pointed out in the past, there is a lot of, shall we call it, karmic tidying up to be done. And so those that have abused others often come in ways that are completing that cycle, that learning cycle. So then, if that is the case, they may very well not be allowed to have children. But not all in that position have that as their reasons. There are many reasons. Often, shall we say, it is false guilt. Some people have had children in lifetimes where the children have died in, shall we call them, pandemics. The children have died and the parents have considered it their failing, their responsibility, and they are guilty. Then in other lives they are incapable of ever going through that again. So their bodies will turn off and they will find it a struggle to have the children they so desire.
Is it possible to reverse that, though, if they went through a healing process on this life and awareness of previous lives?
Of course. Of course, in many cases, simply waking up to the reality that you are not your past lives as such, but it is the resonance that is operating in one's fields. Then, shall we say, attuning each field, clarifying and cleaning out the speckles. Shall we put it this way? The solar system as such is a radiant field with, shall we call them, little points of influence and interference within the whole. These are the planets. They disturb the entire field. And so humankind also has, shall we call them, blocks that disturb the entire field. If you remove one of the blocks, the field reorganizes itself and different aspects begin to arrive. People at this point in history are cleaning much of the field of its disturbances. And as you clear one small disturbance, it accentuates other ones. So you understand, as you clear out some disturbances, other ones appear more strongly. One might, shall we say, be dealing with the physical body not being to one's perfect liking. Because if you clear out that, something else begins to take form. For many people, shall we say, if you cease to have the physical difficulty of form, then one becomes more, shall we call it, sexually appealing. And that is much more difficult to deal with than the other. Do you understand? So often people might, shall we say, bounce between one and the other. Become first appealing and then unappealing and then appealing and so on until they arrive at a certain understanding of what is occurring.
Okay. So I just wanted to understand that path or purpose in life a little bit more in terms of the unity and finding a partner and understanding of acceptance when we understand that they are not perfect. Often a lot of people in my parents' generation then dissolved their relationships through divorce or whatnot. And then some of them have gone on to find other partners and had happy unions, and some haven't. Does that mean that they're out of balance on their second and third chakra if they spend the remainder of their life, 10, 20, 30 odd more years, by themselves?
Always the imbalance was in action. Then rather than, shall we say, sorting out, rather than clarifying the position, first of all, the difficulty in your own time, that is in the present circumstance, men and women are uncomfortable in their bodies. Both have suffered from some form of not valuing those qualities. And so each one struggles, shall we say, to take on more of the other qualities, as if their own was not good enough for them. And so this struggle, of course, is an attempt to rebalance the second chakra, the energy field associated with creativity, into oneself. So one is trying to find a balance within the self, which does not serve the purpose of accepting another. So then one discovers that one's own self is also not perfect. And one then is criticizing oneself for failings to, shall we say, produce the opposite of what they naturally are, rather than building acceptance, learning to experience the self as it is, and learning to use the power that is inherent in both forms. You understand? So bringing together in union brings together two forms of power. And shall we call that, in a sense, it is less than neutralizing, but more that it is, shall we call it, the spark that lights the flame. You understand then what occurs in a true and honest and completed relationship, shall we say. There is, shall we call it, an opposing or an effectual spark that ignites the flame that inherently will lead to deep love.
Mm.
Deep love is not focused on the other person, but on the entirety of life.
Mm.
Then suddenly life is meaningful, and one begins to truly understand one's purpose. And
Okay.
often one's purpose is not separate, but is unified. There is nothing other than energy fields. And as the new world begins to take more, to pay more attention, you will find that even science is beginning to recognize that the physical universe is one, shall we say, of the interaction, the interference patterns of energy fields. So you are starting to recognize there are, shall we say, frequency fields with boundaries that interlace, interact, and cause patterns to occur. This is how science is beginning to review its world and to become more into harmony with the concepts of consciousness. Spirituality then as some form of there is something that is outside, is beginning to drop away, and consciousness that pervades everything is becoming more certified.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add today?
I want to say this. This is a complex study. And as such, trying to, shall we call it, drip feed, and to ask for questions so that there is, shall we say, a relationship between the listener and our replies. Do you understand? So you're developing more of a closeness and community,
Yeah.
following but not separate from.
Yeah.
Because we are talking here at the fundamental level of creation. This is the creative forces. Everyone wants to know about such things. You understand, because there is so much distortions at this frequency level that is playing out in the fields in such a way that is disturbing the evolutionary patterns. For example, so much control and power and sales and pornography in the sexual field. So much control and power is influenced in the financial world, both in business and in illegitimate or criminal business. There is not a difference between sales and sales. If you are selling pornography or child abuse or whatever, it is just as strong a business as something else. But it is a distortion. One is a distortion of power, one is a distortion of sexuality, and so on with the drugs and all other things, because there is an imbalance in security. The society is out of balance. If the society is out of balance, then every individual must find and hold on to their own set of balance and build their own community that remains in balance. Does this follow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, because once a community is imbalanced, they begin to assert influence because they demonstrate the happiness that comes from balancing such in such a fashion.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Enough for today.
Thank you. Thank you so
Then
much.
once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work in consciousness, because as you put out such information, it triggers the recognition in others and therefore shifts the entire human consciousness. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you.